Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Micah. Micah, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you actually do?
Thanks, Gleb. I'm Micah Remley. I'm the CEO of Robin Powered. Robin is a workplace management platform. We help about 2,000 companies implement hybrid work and flexible workplaces in their offices around the globe. So happy to be here with you today.
And I'm happy that you're joining us. So tell me a little bit what you're seeing with people coming back to the offices, but companies still are unhappy and there's still a number of conflicts. What do you see as missing? What do you see as the cause of these conflicts, tensions? What's not there?
Yeah, the conflict is still definitely there, right? And we see that being caused by, I think, one main factor, and that is this fundamental disagreement, obviously, between management and employees around return to office. And to me, it's rooted in this idea of intentionality, which is management feels that there is benefit from people returning back to offices again, and they see company performance, and a lot of times company performance isn't what they want it to be.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, employees clearly see that they can be productive, obviously remotely. But what happens is they get called back into the office, and employees don't understand why they're going to be called back to the office, or they're being called back into the office, and they're having an experience that's not very different from home. And I'll give you a good example of this: is that I've heard from numerous sources that cubicles are back in vogue again, and that cubicle sales are going off through the roof. And it's people are trying to make offices, the only intentionality is people are trying to make offices that are more like home offices. But when you do that, you actually get rid of the whole purpose why you have an office in the first place. So we're seeing this very significant disconnect, and I think lack of intentionality and communication when it comes to return to office initiatives. And that's causing us to be in the place that we continue to be, whereas there's this very significant disconnect between management and employees.
So you're talking about that data and cubicles. That's an important piece of data. I also saw just some recent data from the Nick Bloom survey of work from home arrangements, which shows that when people work from the office, they only have about 80 minutes a week more of face-to-face time. Now, supposedly you're supposed to come to the office for face-to-face time, right? But it seems that if you're only coming to the office for 80 minutes of face time, you're spending much more time commuting than you're actually meeting face to face. So what's the disconnect? It seems like a major missing piece. You're talking about cubicles. Obviously, that impedes face time if you have cubicles. The survey of work from home arrangements seems to back up what you're saying, that the additional face time is very minor. So why is there not more face time? Why are employees coming to the office, not doing the things that collaborative activities that supposedly they're there for?
Right. Because it's that lack of intentionality. So two things happen. So first, management typically says, I want you to return to the office. So you got to return to the office 2 days a week, 3 days a week, name your number. Employees, meanwhile, during that time, though, during the pandemic, typically a lot of teams have become much more dispersed. So we see that in data too. I think Microsoft has released some data on that recently, right? That you see teams are much more dispersed. They're spread around the world more. And second, there's less coordination. So you just have people come into the office for come into the office sake, but no intentionality around why they're coming to the office. They haven't changed their schedules around it. Then the second thing that happens is that typically workplace managers are saying, okay, let me do an employee survey and see what they want. Well, if you ask employees what they want in the office, they want two things. They want food, and they want the office to look more like their home office. And actually, you can look at survey after survey. They want quiet space. They want the same setup. They want everything else, which explains why cubicle sales are on the rise again. But the problem is if the intentionality is that people collaborate more in the workplace, in the actual office, making it look more like their home office is the exact opposite of what you want to do. And I think that's the issue, is that the question of why, what are we trying to accomplish with our return to office initiative, has been missing from most companies. Instead, it's just return to the office is good. I'm going to make you go back to the office. And then people are wondering why it's not having the impact that they want it to have.
Okay. And you're talking about intentionality and collaboration and talking about Microsoft. So I'm actually going to go to Microsoft. They invited me to do a keynote for their for their CLTO's, Chief Learning and Training Officers annual conference. And one of the topics that they want me to talk about is moments that matter. Now, Microsoft has done a lot of good research on moments that matter, finding that the only good reasons to go to the office are moments that matter. These collaborative activities, like let's say the start of a new project or the gelling of a team, that are important activities to do in the office. And so when we're talking about intentionality, can we dig deeper into that and see what, from your perspective, what does it mean to be intentional? What kind of activities should be done from the office? What can managers do to actually be tactically on the ground level intentional about bringing their employees to the office?
So there are some moments that matter. The problem is our ability to predict those moments that matter are much less than we think they are. And they are bridged by things like hierarchy and everything else. So let me give you some examples. So first of all, research bears this out, right? That 90% of your interactions, your collaboration occur at your desk. So when you're at work. So that means about 7% then occurs in meetings, and about 3% occur at the coffee machine, at the ice machine, or the water machine, water cooler, whatever it might be. So 90% occurs at your desk. And these are the recurring interactions of, I'm leaning over and asking Gleb what's going on today, or I'm having you help with a project. And that's where you get that benefit. If you look at the research deeper, right, there's a great study that came out of the Northwestern Kellogg School that looked at productivity at a large tech company. And then what they found was that if you sit near a high performer, you get a 15% performance boost by sitting near that high performer. But you have to sit within 25 feet of them. So once again, the research shows that it's hard to predict these moments that matter. It actually is the regularity of sitting near someone that is really important. And along those lines, what happens is that the reason that you get that boost is twofold. So the reason you get that performance boost is I hear what you're talking about. I hear how you're pitching customers. I hear all of that. So that's one thing. The second piece is that just like going to the gym, if I'm working out next to you and you're working really hard on the treadmill, I'm more likely to work harder on the treadmill too. So you actually get a peer pressure benefit. So now think about a modern office. If you go in and sit in a cubicle or you sit by yourself, you get none of those collaboration benefits whatsoever. If I go into an office and I go and disappear into a conference room all day on video conference calls, I get no benefits from being in the office whatsoever. This is this disconnect that's occurring, is that people just want people to return to the office because they want the benefits of it, but then they aren't actually setting their office up for success.
That's interesting. So what about virtual ways of recreating some of those benefits? So I'm thinking one of the things I've helped something like over 26 organizations, 27 by now, figure out their flexible work strategies. And one of the techniques we use is virtual co-working, where people get on a video conference call and they work on their individual tasks during a video conference call, but they can observe each other and they can ask questions of each other. And so they can have that interactivity without taking the additional time to commute to the office. So I'm curious about your perspective on ways of recreating those ways of collaborating with each other through casual interactions in virtual settings.
So once again, if we look at the empirical research, it shows that virtual collaboration does not well replicate in-person interactions at all. This is a feeling, obviously lots of people, but once again, if we look at the data says the same thing. And in fact, a very recent study just came out in the journal Nature, probably the most preeminent scientific journal out there, looked at breakthrough innovation research among academic teams. And what was really interesting about the research is, first of all, they found that you are much more likely to have a breakthrough innovative research idea if you are co-located with somebody than if you worked on an authorship with someone remotely with someone. So once again, if we look at the empirical research, it shows this benefit that a lot of leaders kind of feel and touch. And one really interesting thing the researchers did is they looked at the level of the researchers. So what they looked at was if you had one person who was really highly regarded researcher, published lots of papers, and somebody who was newer in the career, less regarded, published less research. What they looked at is if those people collaborated remotely, so they were remote from each other, they found you're even less likely to produce a breakthrough innovation research. Whereas if you're co-located with that person, you are just as likely as the rest of the group to develop innovative research and a breakthrough innovation idea. So it shows this idea of hierarchy and communication becomes very different when you're remote from somebody than when you're physically located with somebody. And these are all things that I think workplace leaders feel, but we don't exactly, first of all, we don't know exactly how that interaction works. And then even less likely, that intentionality we're talking about, how do you actually make and design a workplace and an office strategy to help make those types of interactions occur?
Yeah, I know about that study. It's a really good study. I know there was some follow-up work which wasn't yet published, which shows that that was true until about the 2010s. And then around the 2010s, with an introduction of new tools that allow more effective remote collaboration, that seems to have addressed some of the problems with remote collaboration, made it more equal. I'll send you the information after the interview. I think it's a really interesting follow-up. But so that's obviously something we can chat about in email. But something I wanted to check with you about is you're talking about some companies, many companies that aren't doing a good job of getting their employees into the office. But the companies that are, hopefully there are some companies from your perspective that are doing a good job of ensuring that when their employees are coming to the office, they're doing the right things. What are those really great collaboration companies doing?
Yeah, so a few things they're doing is we talked about having purpose around your return to office. So a few things they're doing is they're thinking deeply about the types of people and teams they want to collaborate in person in the office. And then they're making sure that those people are co-located. We talked about the importance of co-location. So they're co-located together. And then the second piece is they are making sure that they're coming in on the same days, right? So they're being very thoughtful about that. So rather than free for all, come in whenever you want, they're having team days, they're having anchor days. And then they're being very thoughtful about where people are sitting. You know, we can debate kind of the merits of the nature study, but we can look at other research studies. Once again, it's a great one out of Oxford University that looked at co-location in call centers. And what they found was in critical and time-sensitive situations, you got a 10% performance boost by having people physically co-located next to each other. And they all had the same remote collaboration tools. And what they found with that, the author said that being on the other side of the room, you might as well be on the other side of the city. So once again, this idea of close proximity, that 25-foot piece, ends up becoming this really recurring theme you see in the published and empirical research so far. So being thoughtful about where people are working in the office, and then making sure that they're coming in on the same days is a really important part, because in flexible work, that's often, you get no benefit if you sit someone next to each other in a seating map, but one person comes in on Monday and one person comes in on Fridays, they might as well not be coming into the office at all. And I think if you look at the frustration around office productivity and what employees have around the office, that often is the issue, right? Like, why did I bother coming in and sitting on Zoom calls all day long, or sitting by myself?
So thinking about how to implement this, what I tend to advise companies to do is to provide employees with data, with research, and let the teams on the ground levels make the decisions on when and how to come into the office, because different teams have different needs. And of course, you want to make sure the team coordinates with each other, including where to sit, how to collaborate effectively, what to do, rather than have a top-down mandate of, let's say, come down 3 days a week, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and you get people don't really have the kind of benefits from collaboration. So how should companies be making a decision about this? From this ground level where you provide teams and individual employees with the research and have them make the decision together to make sure that they get that collaborative benefit, or should there be a different approach to how companies actually implement this information and research on the ground level?
I think there should be a different approach. So my take is, what is the most contentious issue in the workplace today? It's about return to office, right? Probably the most contentious issue in the workplace today. So we're going to push it down to individual managers and teams and have them drive the decision around the most contentious issue in the workplace today. To be honest with you, I think that's why 4 years after the pandemic, we've largely failed in getting back to some sort of equilibrium that both workplace leaders as well as employees think is a good place to be. My take is that leadership across the company has to think deeply about what kind of culture they want to create. Is it a culture of a remote workplace culture? And that's fine. Obviously, some places decide to do that. Or is it a culture where the benefits of in-person collaboration, those serendipitous moments, the mentorship piece, which is so important, that peer help, if that's a really important piece, if those are the parts that are important to you, then setting up a workplace and a workplace strategy that reflects that. Now, I think to your point, giving teams flexibility within that is actually really important, but you have to create a structure, just like everything else across your organization. You create a structure within a framework of the culture we're trying to create. If you don't do that, then you just hand it off to teams. I think you get failure, which is what we're seeing across most organizations today. I think ones we see doing it well are ones that have said, this is the culture we want to create. Now we're going to allow teams to operate within some flexibility within that framework, but they create a framework first. And I think that's what leadership has to do. And what leadership is oftentimes failed at one way or the other, from saying, hey, just got to be in the office 2 days a week. Well, why? What's the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? How does that apply to everyone? What does it mean for exception? And there's so many questions in that. Or we're going to make no decision whatsoever, and we're just going to let teams and leaders figure it out. I think both are wrong, and someplace in the middle, which is creating that framework, I think is the right answer. And that's what we see the best companies doing, by the way. The most innovative companies on the face of the planet, a number of which we work with, that's what they do.
Yeah, whenever I work with companies, I start by creating a framework. That's kind of fundamental. But within that framework, what I tend to see is that companies that do it poorly are companies that put a top-down mandate, then employees really resent that, and they don't really comply. And that's when you get a lot of problems. So that's the things that I see not working. Of course, you need to create a framework first with certain guidelines, certain limitations, and certain support for companies. I mean, you need to give managers training. There are some OWL Lab studies show that something like 7 out of 10 managers haven't gotten training on how to do hybrid work. That's a really important part of a framework. How do you actually do hybrid work effectively? But yes, within that, then you want to make sure that people feel that they have a lot of buy-in and a lot of engagement. Because if you don't do that, you're really not going to get the benefits of people coming into the office, because they'll be sitting by themselves, they'll resent that interaction, they'll put on their headphones and not really interact, and you can't really punish them for doing so. There are various ways of non-compliance that employees are seeing, and it's really hard to get them to comply if they don't have buy-in.
Definitely right, for sure. You definitely need to be a buy-in across the group, but once again, the intentionality, what are you trying to accomplish, and making sure that employees understand that. And on the buy-in front, not all employees might not like it. And that's okay too, right? But once again, if they understand why you're doing something, you're being intentional on what the culture you're trying to create across the organization, that's where we see the most effective from a productivity and output standpoint, right? And I think that's the most important part, is you have to separate how are we thinking about productivity versus how are we thinking about employee NPS and employee satisfaction. They all hopefully are related, but you might have to go through a transition associated with these as you think about what is the culture you're trying to create across the organization. I think that's where people have not done a good job over the past few years for the most part.
And as we finish up, one of the things that you want to think about, you're talking about productivity, other things like this, the employee NPS. How do you measure these things? What are the metrics that we're using here? What are your thoughts on the metrics?
Yeah, so first of all, almost nobody's measuring this right now. And what we see in the workplace, to your point earlier, is people are just literally looking at people in seats and saying, how occupied is my office? Maybe what is my compliance level? Most people aren't even looking at that. So they've created a
Mhm.
policy, and then people aren't compliant, and then
Yeah.
they've got employees that have some sort of level of animosity over the policy that's been created. So we actually saw this need in the marketplace, so we've released
Mhm.
something called the Workplace Collaboration Score, and it allows
Mhm.
people to see how you're doing. We see three components of
Mhm.
collaboration in person, and those three components are occupancy is one. It's probably the most obvious one, but it's only the small one. And then the next piece is this idea of ad hoc collaboration, that most
Mhm.
of your collaboration occurs at a desk. And we help people see and then benchmark people against other companies to see how companies are actually doing at getting people to cluster and sit in those groups of desks together, or are they sitting by themselves? And then they're going to have that animosity, and there's no reason for them to commute in the office then. And then finally, this idea of planned collaboration. We actually looked at the data, and we found that 54% of meetings in conference rooms in the workplace are one person in the meeting room working on a video conference call by themselves.
Mhm.
So a person sitting alone in a conference room. Over half of the meetings that occur in the workplace are just that.
Mhm.
So it's not surprising. So if you look at those three things, it's the three things that people complain most about at the
Sure.
office. I went in, it was empty. I went in, I sat by myself, or I went in, I sat on video conference calls all day long.
Mhm.
And so we can actually measure how companies are doing on those attributes. And this gets back to that piece of intentionality. Are you bringing people in on the right teams, on the right days,
Mhm.
in the right places together? So that way you're driving in-person collaboration and getting the benefits from in-person collaboration. Or do you simply just have a, hey, you got to be back in the office policy, and then not getting any benefits from it whatsoever? So there's definitely tools out there for companies to use
Mhm.
to get a better sense of how they're doing, and then they can make workplace decisions around that. And I know for us, so as a story, we looked at our numbers, and what we found was that 80% of our meetings were a single person sitting in a conference room by
Mhm.
themselves. So the initial question was, do we have more phone booths? Do we put in more phone booths in the office? But if we looked at what was happening was our sales team has gotten, and our customer team has gotten very used to taking calls by themselves. So every time
Mhm.
they have a customer call, they go disappear to a room someplace. But then this gets back to the discussion we just had, that if you're doing that, you're getting rid of the very benefit of sitting next to somebody who's on calls all day. It's actually hearing them, seeing how many calls they make, getting the pressure of, hey, they're making lots of calls, I should make the calls too,
Mhm.
hearing how they're presenting to customers. That's the benefit of them. So
Mhm.
we actually said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk to the team. We're going to say, we want you to do calls, because the whole point of you coming into the office is so that you can hear each other's calls. So therefore,
Mhm.
we want you to do them at your desk, even though that's not what you got used to over the past few years. So this massive transition we're going through,
Mhm.
and I think most managers and workplace leaders don't know, A, what to look at. You talked about training before. And B, the data can actually tell us some really interesting stories that allow us to peel that onion and see what's actually
Mhm.
happening, and measure if our workplace is actually achieving the results that we want. Otherwise, maybe we should go back and look at our back to work policy.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah. No, this is great. Thank you, Micah. This has been very helpful. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Gleb. It's great to join you again. Thank you.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show.